It is finally here. It's like Christmas morning. I love this weekend, one of my favorite weekends of the year. Final draft weekend. I know some people have already done their drafts, but a lot of people wait, like me, wait until the very last second to do it, get rid of all those injuries, potential, through training camp, normally through preseason, and then roster cuts are coming today. So there's still the chance for there to be a couple more shakeups in the league. But as it stands right now, nothing crazy has happened outside of, Leonard Fournette and Adrian Peterson getting cut. We'll talk about that a little bit as we go through this video. But if you haven't done your draft yet, I want to give you guys my list of the final PPR tiers rankings for 2020 fantasy football heading into your drafts. Again, we've been poring over this for months, trying to get this as spot on as possible, and we feel like we're finally there. So let's talk about it. We'll go through each position. I'm not going to spend too much time. I will talk a little bit about strategy and when to target these specific tiers. But if you guys want more information on that, I have player breakdowns for pretty much everyone in the top 100, 150 videos for them on our channel. Also have overarching draft strategy. You can also check out our website, fantasyaddictionnetwork.com, have all these rankings and tiers listed out for you. You guys can print them out, change it up if you're doing half PPR or standard. We got rankings on there for you as well. Everything you need for this draft weekend, and giving that to you guys for free this year as we're just trying to establish ourselves as a trusted voice in this wonderful ecosphere. So without further ado, let's start breaking down the tiers. We'll begin with the quarterbacks. Obviously, this one is the most chalk. Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. No one's going to argue. Lamar Jackson broke the record for most points per game in 2019 from the quarterbacks. Mahomes broke the record for most points in a season by quarterbacks. Most likely going to be at the top of the position by the end of the year. Problem with them is the fact that you have to spend such an early pick on them, which is typically counterintuitive to building a winning roster. You basically need Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes to hit their absolute ceiling for them to be worth the second round pick. Probably going to be passing on them this year. Someone I am far more likely to take is my tier 2. Dak Prescott, to me, sits alone in tier 2 above Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson, and Deshaun Watson. They all have similar upside, but I think Dak Prescott has a much more stable floor and an even higher ceiling this year, with Dallas grabbing Mike McCarthy. Mike McCarthy's best defense is winning with this offense. And not only that, they lost main pieces on their defense, add CeeDee Lamb, got Blake Jarwin replacing an aged Jason Witten. Tony Pollard is killing it in camp. This is going to be a phenomenal team, the Chiefs of the NFC. I see a world where Dak Prescott outscores both Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes in fantasy this year. And the fact that you can still get him in the 5th, 6th round, it's the only quarterback I'm considering really taking early. And then right behind them, we got Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson. All these guys have massive ceiling, but I think they all have their own problems, right? So Kyler Murray, we haven't seen him do it yet. He did pretty well last year for a rookie. We'll see if he can make that jump forward with DeAndre Hopkins. I think he would definitely take a big step forward, but how big is that step? Will it be Lamar Jackson-like, or will it keep him in the top 5 of quarterbacks? Russell Wilson, he just needs to be able to throw the ball. The saying, let Russ cook, is very, very necessary if Russell Wilson is going to outperform his ADP. He would be the number 1 quarterback overall if they'd actually let him throw the ball, but doesn't look like they're planning on changing their game plan too much. Adding Carlos Hyde, adding DJ Dallas, still got Rashad Penny coming back. Chris Carson's still there. Probably going to continue to run the ball a lot. Russell Wilson definitely has the highest ceiling of all these guys if he actually was put in a position to throw the ball 600 times, but not banking on that. And then Deshaun Watson, obviously he's shown his ceiling, but without DeAndre Hopkins, it could be a little bit of a murky year for him. So probably someone I'd end up staying away from in redraft leagues. The next tier, each of these tiers get a little bit bigger. So we're talking about strategy. For me, I call it like the ripcord strategy. Like if you're free falling, and at some point you got to pull the cord and just pull the parachute out. My first parachute ripcord is Dak Prescott, 5th, 6th round. If I'm liking the team that I have, I don't feel like I had to reach for anyone. I'm actually getting the guys that I want, and I feel pretty comfortable the draft room is going to leave me some values in the next rounds. Sometimes I just pull the ripcord out and say, screw it. I want a solid top tier quarterback that has a chance at being the quarterback 1. I pull that ripcord out for Dak Prescott. If I don't do that, and then I wait a couple more rounds and I take one of these guys. Preferably Matt Ryan. I also really like Cam Newton this year, but I don't hate any of these guys here except for Josh Allen. I think Josh Allen is a little bit of a trap. He's going to start the season out probably pretty well. He has a pretty easy schedule for the first couple weeks of the season, and then it turns completely south the back half of the year. Worst schedule amongst quarterbacks, and Josh Allen has historically performed very poorly in fantasy against good defenses. So not looking forward to the end of the season for Josh Allen. So if you do draft him, expect to have to pivot off of him later. And Tom Brady, obviously good upside. Drew Brees, Carson Wentz, all these guys are going to finish near the top of the position each week, but they don't give you that rushing floor that you get with the guys like Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, Sean Watson, Russell Wilson. All right. And then jumping up to tier 5, so this is where it gets massive. So this is the last ripcord, obviously. If you don't take a guy in the 9th, 10th round, just keep waiting. Like, you're fine. You're going to be able to nab a Ryan Tannehill, a Jared Goff, a Jimmy Garoppolo, Ben Roethlisberger, Matthew Stafford, somewhere from rounds 12 to 14, and that's okay. All of these guys are capable starters. They're going to put up enough quarterback 1 weeks that if you're streaming the position and playing good matchups with other players, you're going to get good quarterback production. So there's no reason to reach on a quarterback early on because there's so many guys you can grab later that are still a tremendous value. And there's still even guys after this tier that you could even theoretically stream. So my strategy is, unless I'm taking Dak Prescott or Matt Ryan, I'll probably end up drafting 2 guys in this tier. But even then, honestly, I'm fine with going into the season with one quarterback as long as I'm comfortable with their matchup. So guys like Tannehill, Bridgewater, Garoppolo all have a really great matchup first week. So be totally comfortable leaving my draft with only one of those guys. All right, let's jump over to the running backs, because obviously this is the one that gets debated the most. This is the most important position in fantasy football, bar none. The disparity between the top running backs and the bottom running backs is so far and away different than the rest of the fantasy landscape. You have to get the running back position right. So clearly, if you have the 101 or 102, you're going to take Christian McCaffrey or Saquon Barkley. I know you don't want to be slaves to the ADP, and you could theoretically make an argument for any of the other guys I'm about to talk about over these, but for me, if I'm going to have the first overall pick, I want the best shot at being able to land the guy that finishes number 1. And yes, we haven't seen a running back repeat their number 1 running back season since Priest Holmes in 2002, 2003. But if anyone's going to do it, it's going to be the next coming of Marshall Faulk and Christian McCaffrey. So Christian McCaffrey 101, Saquon Barkley 102. I think that's pretty chalk, but I'm okay with it. All right, now we get into the next tier, and this is where you start getting creative, start getting fun. So Ezekiel Elliott, pretty much the consensus 103. I do have slight concerns for Ezekiel Elliott this year with Tony Pollard looking to get a lot of work in camp. Mike McCarthy is known for some of his running back shenanigans. Now Kellen Moore is calling the offense, so I do think Ezekiel Elliott will probably continue getting a massive workload, but it might be a little bit less this year than what you're expecting. And if that offense really is throwing the ball a lot, I don't think that really hurts Elliott because he is still pretty involved in the passing game. So I'm not going to make an argument. He's my number 3 running back overall. But if you have, any trepidation over him, like, I'm fine with any of these guys as my RB1. Alvin Kamara hopefully gets that contract situation squared away, but it doesn't look like it's going to impact him heading into the season. Again, if you draft Alvin Kamara, just make sure you grab Latavius Murray in the 9th round. Just shore up that position just in case Kamara decides to do anything crazy and hold out. You don't want to be left holding a bag. Derrick Henry got his money, so we don't have to worry about him. Coming in, the Titans lost Jack Conklin, but they replaced him with a good offensive line in the first round of the NFL draft. And honestly, this team is going to funnel through Derrick Henry, and there's even reports now of him being more involved in the passing game. Like, there's definitely an argument to be made with Derrick Henry being number 1 overall at the position this year. Miles Sanders, my personal favorite this year, doesn't look like they're really concerned about the injury that he sustained. They dropped Elijah Holyfield. They're going into the regular season with only 3 running backs on their roster. You wouldn't do that if you were actually concerned about Miles Sanders' injury. So I expect him to have a massive year, and he could very clearly jump up into that top tier. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, only number 1 or first round pick in Andy Reid's entire career. Andy Reid has a massive history of having really good fantasy producers, number 1 overall running backs throughout his career. Jamal Charles, LaShawn McCoy, Brian Westbrook, Deuce Staley, all guys that finished in the top tier of their position, and some of them even finishing as the number one overall. The only downside to Helaire is the fact that, with rookies, looking back at Reed, with the exception of Kareem Hunt, doesn't have as many rookies finishing in the top 12. However, with Damian Williams opting out, this could be more of a Kareem Hunt situation where Clyde Edwards-Helaire just comes in and just takes over the role right away. They cut DeAndre Washington this morning, so Darrell Williams isn't a guy that really scares me. I think he'll get some touches and it might be a little annoying for a few weeks, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire is another guy like Miles Sanders where I think he's being a little bit undervalued right now. Even going in the first round, probably could be argued to be taken over a guy like Alvin Kamara, who doesn't have a murky contract situation. Dalvin Cook, another guy with a murky contract situation, should smash this year if he plays the full 16 games. Obviously, injury history as well there, pushing him down in our rank slightly. But make sure you grab Madison if you grab Cook. Cook should be able to eat again this year. And then Joe Mixon, getting that contract situation gave me all the assurance I needed to be able to move him into this tier. So again, if you have a pick in the first round, make sure you walk away with one of these guys. You're going to want to have an elite tier running back locked and loaded at your RB1 position. And then looking at our tier 3, I'm fine with all these guys as my RB2. There's reasons to be skeptical on all of them, which is why they're slightly downgraded from the previous tier. Kenyon Drake obviously hasn't done it yet. He had a pretty good stretch of games when he came into Arizona last year, but there were even 3 weeks where he was averaging about 10 points, and then he had those massive blow-up games to win leagues last year. And the question is, will his 2020 season look more like that, or is it going to be up and down? So Kenny Drake obviously has a massive upside, but I think his floor is probably the lowest of all of these guys. Nick Chubb's biggest issue, obviously, is Kareem Hunt. If Nick Chubb was alone in that backfield, Nick Chubb would arguably be the number 4, number 5 running back on my board. I love Nick Chubb as a talent. I think the Browns are being underrated this year. They did massive upgrades to their offensive line with adding Jack Conklin and going after offensive line in the first round of the NFL draft. So they are going to be a run-first team with Kevin Stefanski there. And then let's remember, Dalvin Cook only had about 60% of the running back touches in that offense last year. So Nick Chubb doesn't necessarily need to be a 70-80% opportunity share guy to be a running back one. I think he's talented enough and playing on a good enough team that he'll be able to do pretty well with the touches that he gets. It's just a question of does it actually skip over to 50-50? I'm not thinking it will. I think Nick Chubb fits really well with that zone blocking scheme or zone running scheme with Kevin Stefanski. So I still really like Nick Chubb this year, but there's definitely concern there. Aaron Jones, same thing. Are they going to, give more workload to A.J. Dillon? Are they going to keep Jamal Williams involved? But Aaron Jones has been one of the most efficient runners with his touches, just as efficient as Alvin Kamara. Pray to God that Matt LaFleur comes to his senses and just gives Aaron Jones the ball. Should be an absolute dominant running back every single week if they would actually give him consistent touches. Now, Austin Eckler and Josh Jacobs, I have lower than consensus. These are the only two guys that I'm actually a little bit worried about in this tier. I've contemplated kicking them out, but they are both incredibly talented backs. When you look at their production profile, when you look at their efficiency, when you look at how they've played thus far at this point in their career, I can't give you a reason to not like them other than their situation this year. So it's narrative-based, which is why I haven't taken them out of Tier 3. Austin Eckler, obviously playing without Phillip Rivers. Phillip Rivers always targets his running backs very heavily. Tyrod Taylor, not as much. So Austin Eckler should see a pretty big drop in his passing production this year. And with Joshua Kelly doing really good in camp, it could be a pretty close to 50-50 split between Eckler and Kelly for carries heading into the season. This should be a much more conservative offense. I'm expecting there to be a lot less plays ran, so I think his ceiling is brought down a bit lower, but he's a really, really talented guy. So overall, don't hate him. And then Josh Jacobs, there's already some rumor that he could be dealing with an injury, although that's kind of unknown right now. They're being very mum on that. But when you look at the additions over the offseason, yes, they let DeAndre Washington go, but they extended Jalen Richard with a pretty decent-sized contract. They bring in Theo Riddick. They bring in Devontae Booker. They draft Lynn Bowden. All of these guys are pass-catching specialists. I don't think Josh Jacobs is going to take the increase in receptions that you want him to take. The other issue is the Raiders' schedule is absolutely brutal. Last year, Josh Jacobs was one of the most game script dependent running backs in the entire NFL. When the Raiders were winning in the first half of the year was when Josh Jacobs was doing really well. Over the back half of the year, obviously he was dealing with the shoulder injury as well, but saw his production go down massively in games where the Raiders were behind. And if the Raiders, like you look at their schedule from week 2 on, like week 1 is going to be a great game against Carolina, but from week 2 on, it is an absolute gauntlet, and the Raiders could be a very high loss team, I guess is a good way of putting it. And if that is the case, I am very nervous that Josh Jacobs is not going to be on the field much in the second half of games, and that is really going to limit his ceiling. So those are the two guys that I personally would try to avoid drafting in this tier. I think that they still have the chance at hitting it, but if I'm just being honest with you, I'm much more confident in Drake, Chubb, and Jones than I am in Eckler and Jacobs. All right, and then tier 4, it gets really interesting. So Jonathan Taylor, we've talked a ton about. I don't need to talk about him much more. All reports in camp, he's absolutely killing it. Obviously, he's playing behind Marlon Mack, so it might take a few weeks before he actually has the workload, but I think he is significantly better than Mack, and Mack didn't really do that much with his touches. Last year, he was like 27th in terms of expected fantasy points, so he didn't actually create a lot with what he was given last year, playing behind one of the best, if not the best, offensive line in the entire NFL. Jonathan Taylor is going to take this job at some point. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and when he does, everyone will regret not drafting him. The next guy here that I've moved up, he was on my don't draft list, and take this with a word of warning, because sometimes when I move up on guys that I've been down on, it ends up not working out for me. But James Conner is a guy that, first of all, was going in the first round last year. Terrible injury history. Don't need me to play that one back for you. Hasn't finished 16 games in his entire career and may not again. However, Mike Tomlin shows us time and time again that he does not run a running back by committee. James Conner is going to be the lead workhorse in this backfield and is going to get a significant amount of touches both out of the backfield and via receptions in the passing game. Ben Roethlisberger loves to target his running backs. James Conner is going to be an absolute steal in drafts if he plays 16 games. The reason why I'm not that worried about drafting him now and why I've come around on him is if you take him in the 3rd and he gets hurt after week 8, Benny Snell has been looking really good in camp. And I know that sounds weird because I'm not a big Benny Snell guy, but he has taken a pretty significant jump in terms of his production and the way the team feels about him. I'm pretty confident that if I take James Conner, handcuff him with Benny Snell. You can get him in like the last round of your drafts. Just do it. If you have a guy that has an injury profile of James Conner, make sure that you have the insurance if he goes down, because they're going to flip around and give that. And I would honestly, if you have a deep enough bench, grab Anthony McFarland as well, because one of those guys between Benny Snell and Anthony McFarland would become a league winner if James Conner goes down. But again, if James Conner plays 16 games, there's no way he doesn't outperform his ADP. All right, jump into running back tier 5. This is the tier that I am very iffy on, with the exception of the rookies here. Todd Gurley already dealing with injuries. Melvin Gordon has pretty much gotten his job taken away from him. They entered training camp saying it was going to be like all Melvin Gordon, and then it turned into a 50-50 split because Lindsey will not go away. This is going to be an ugly situation where it's going to be a hot hand. 1 week Melvin Gordon's going to be good. Next week Lindsey. I don't want anything to do with that backfield anymore. David Johnson looked like an absolute beached whale playing last year, and with Bill O'Brien being stubborn, they're probably going to give him plenty of touches, and I don't expect him to be very efficient on any of them. And Duke Johnson is a very efficient running back too. Also, David Johnson hasn't finished a season since 2016, so an injury history there. Le'Veon Bell, it just absolute toxic culture there with Adam Gase right now, talking about Frank Gore as looking like the best he's ever seen him and wanting to give Frank Gore significant touches. Like, this offense is already bad enough. They're losing all of their pass catching options. It seems like everyone outside of Jamison Crowder already has an injury. I'm very concerned for the Jets, and until Adam Gase is gone, I don't want anything to do with Le'Veon Bell. Chris Carson, another one that I might have blinders on. He played really well last year, but with adding Carlos Hyde, adding DJ Dallas and still have Rashad Penny coming back into the fold and dealing with a pretty massive hip injury that he's recovering from last year, I'm concerned that Chris Carson will not be the same player that he was last year, and it could turn into more of a committee situation, which would be less than appealing for a guy you have to take in the third round. So getting back to the rookies, Cam Akers, DeAndre Swift. Similar situation for these guys as Jonathan Taylor, although Cam Akers is kind of being thrust into a starting role because Darrell Henderson is already hurt. Doesn't look like he's going to be good to go for week 1. Malcolm Brown is probably going to get the ceremonial start in week 1, but I think Cam Akers will get the majority of touches. Playing against the Cowboys should be a pretty decent game for Cam Akers to come out right off the bat. My biggest concern for Akers is the fact that the Rams' offensive line is garbage. You can hear me break that down more in our video. But I think Cam Akers is going to end up being better than a lot of these guys on this list, which is why I have him number 1 here. And then DeAndre Swift, I have him at the bottom of this tier because he's going to be like Miles Sanders was last year. You're probably not going to be very happy with him for the first 4 or 6 games, so you don't want to draft him expecting to start him immediately. But if you can get him in the 6th round, which is where his ADP is right now, by the end of the season, he could be a league winner. Just like Miles Sanders was last year, once he has significant touches, guy is incredibly talented, especially in the passing game, which is the most valuable for a running back to be involved in PPR leagues. I think DeAndre Swift is going to absolutely smash over the back half of the year. So I would still consider him in this tier just based on where he's going to finish the year. You just have to be a little patient with him. Okay, next tier. This is the weird tier for me. Mark Ingram obviously played tremendously well last year. But with J.K. Dobbins coming into the fold, I'm concerned for his overall touches, and we could see J.K. Dobbins just win this job outright at some point in the season. So unless you're able to grab both, which it's kind of hard because you have to spend a 4th-round pick on Ingram and a 6th-round pick on Dobbins, that's kind of expensive for 2 running backs in the same backfield. Antonio Gibson. This is a very interesting situation to monitor. So with Adrian Peterson getting cut, Antonio Gibson is being thrust into a role where we don't really know if he's going to have the predominant amount of carries, but based on comments that Adrian Peterson himself made, it appears that Washington let Peterson go specifically because they wanted Gibson to take his role. And Peterson's role was going to be the predominant running back. Antonio Gibson, we were expecting him to be involved in the passing game because that's what he did mostly in college. He only had 33 carries in college, but very productive on those carries. The guy, from an athletic standpoint, is just as athletic as Jonathan Taylor, just doesn't have the production profile. But if he's getting the majority of the carries, massive upside for Antonio Gibson, even on a crappy team. Very, very talented running back. Obviously, there's still Bryce Love, Peyton Barber, and J.D. McKissic there. So I don't project him to get the majority of the carries, but if he does, I have him ranked way too low. And based on what service you guys are using, if you're drafting in high stakes leagues, he's going in like the 4th, 5th round right now. But most places he's still going like 8th or later. I would love to grab Antonio Gibson in the 6th or 7th round and just see what I can get. That is the kind of upside play you can take at the running back spot that late. Absolutely dominant. All right, and then Kareem Hunt, obviously we already talked about him. James White, I really like his upside in New England with Cam Newton there. He's probably going to end up being the 2nd most targeted player on that team, and that's going to give you a really high floor every week. Not really that scared with Sony Michel. They cut Lamar Miller this morning. Damian Harris had been looking good, but now he has a hand injury, so I think James White is locked and loaded as a really high floor player and decent ceiling every week. Could be like a poor man's Christian McCaffrey. All right, and then Tier 7, I want nothing to do with most of the guys in this tier. Raheem Mostert is going way earlier than I'm comfortable drafting him. That backfield is never a single running back. That's just Kyle Shanahan's MO. So we're going to see Tevin Coleman and Jerick McKinnon involved. Don't want anything to do with that. Devin Singletary has been fumbling a lot in camp. Zach Moss has been just straight up outplaying him. So I'm not going to reach and take Singletary. Fournette is interesting. Going to Tampa Bay, I think his upside is much higher than it was in Jacksonville, but he's probably not going to have the starting job for at least the first month of the season. Coming in very late into training camp, it's basically going to require Ronald Jones to effectively give that job back to him, and I think he will because I think Leonard Fournette is more talented than Ronald Jones in general, but where you have to take him, like unless you can grab both guys in like the 7th, 6th, 7th, 8th round, I would want both of them just on the off chance that Fournette doesn't take the job. You don't want to be stuck holding the bag. And David Montgomery already dealing with a groin injury. Doesn't look like it's that serious because they haven't done anything to address the running back room. But I do really like the upside chance of J.K. Dobbins here. So of all the players in this tier, that would be the only one I'm really targeting. And overall, probably just avoiding this tier altogether. Hopefully by this point you've already drafted 3 or 4 running backs. You don't even have to think about this. Again, Dobbins would be the only guy I would take because similar situation with Swift. I do think he'll take over at some point, but Ingram is much better than Kerryon Johnson. So the odds of J.K. Dobbins taking over versus DeAndre Swift, it's definitely leaning more towards Swift, which is why I have him ranked higher. I'll get to you guys' questions in just a second. Hang tight with me. Let me get through the running back tiers. I'll stop before I get to the receivers. And then the last tier I want to go over here is, this is a pretty depthy tier, but guys I'm going to target late in drafts is pretty much from this list. So Matt Breida, Jordan Howard, probably going a little bit earlier. I think Matt Breida has a higher upside there. Zach Moss, again, if you can grab him, he'll end up being the starter at some point this year over Devin Singletary, and he's still going 2-3 rounds later. Chris Thompson going really late. And I think he's going to have a pretty significant red zone role and a receiving role in that offense. It's a free flyer pick. He's probably going to get hurt, but you'll be able to use him for a couple of weeks in the season. I think that would, or to start the season, I think that's a great strategy. That's what you want to do with the back half of your draft. Duke Johnson, again, I'm not a big fan of David Johnson going into that offense. If he gets hurt, Duke Johnson is thrust into a massively productive role. Derek McKinnon has been lights out in camp. I think he takes the number 2 running back role outside of Mostert pretty quickly, and he could arguably be the better back of the 3 of them there. Chase Edmonds, pretty much guaranteed you have to take him if you take Drake, but I think Chase Edmonds has enough upside in his own right, because if Drake does get hurt, Chase Edmonds is thrust into that same role, and I think he could be just as productive as Drake. Same thing with Latavius Murray. With Kamara's potential contract situation, you want to make sure you lock down that backfield with Latavius Murray, because he was a running back 1 the 2 weeks that Kamara missed last year. All right, as I promised, let's talk to your guys' questions real quick. So I hear Jonnu Smith or TJ Hawkinson. Honestly, if you can get both, that's perfect. I love both of those guys. We'll get to them in our tiers here in a second when we go over the tight ends, but I think TJ Hawkinson is a slightly higher upside playing on an offense that's going to throw the ball a little bit more, but I like Jonnu Smith better as a potential breakout candidate this year just based on conservation of targets, because outside of A.J. Brown and Derrick Henry, there's not really any other playmakers, whereas in Detroit, you have Swift now, you have Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones already, and Matt Patricia is also notorious for wanting to spread the ball around between those guys. So I think TJ Hawkinson probably has a higher upside, but I like Jonnu Smith a lot. And Jonnu Smith is a little bit cheaper. But honestly, if you can grab both of those guys in like 12th, 13th round, I would just do that. And then for Sam's question between Diggs or A.J. Brown, that is a really good question. Diggs is going to be the hardest guy to project each week every year because he's either going to give you like 30 points or 5. Against the Jets, I'd probably be comfortable starting Diggs in that situation. I love A.J. Brown. I'm very curious to see if he's able to repeat what he was doing last year. So I'm not going to recommend that you bench A.J. Brown. So probably just based on how I feel about Brown as a talent, I would tell you to start Brown over Diggs. But the thing that sucks with Diggs is you can never really bench him, because the moment that you bench him and then he blows up, you're mad at yourself. And then the moment you start him and he sucks, you're mad at yourself. And that's my main reason for why I'm just not drafting Diggs at all this year, because I don't want to deal with that headache. And I think that's pretty much it for now. If you guys have more questions, I'll jump back to them. But anyway, let's get to the wide receivers. So this one, obviously, Michael Thomas has to be in the top tier. Like, there's no question about that. Had the 3rd best fantasy season for a wide receiver in the history of fantasy football. And then Devontae Adams, who's averaged about 20 fantasy points per game over the course of his last 2 years when playing fully healthy. I feel like this year is going to be a Devontae Adams dominant year, and I think he's going to end up finishing the season ahead of Michael Thomas, but I think they'll be close enough that I don't really have an argument one for the other. Devontae Adams is going to see an enormous target share in that offense because there are very few playmakers outside of Devontae Adams on Green Bay. And I think Aaron Rodgers is going to play with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder after they ended up drafting Jordan Love in the 1st round. I think he wants to prove to them that they probably made a mistake doing that. And I could see Aaron Rodgers having, a little bit more gusto and trying to stick it to the staff, because that's just unfortunately kind of how he is. And we'll see. But overall, I think Davante Adams has a shot at 200 targets this year, and that would be massive for fantasy, especially in PPR. And then obviously Michael Thomas, you don't need me to argue for him. Definitely both worth first-round picks. I'm still likely taking running backs over these guys unless I'm in the last half of the draft and Sanders and Mixon don't fall to me. Okay, and then wide receiver tier number 2, guys that I like almost as much, but Julio Jones and Tyreek Hill both have a little bit more red flags. Julio Jones obviously heading into his age 31 season. Calvin Ridley has been ascending and has been looking really good in camp. So that could end up being a more even distribution between Jones and Ridley this year. You're basically banking on Ridley getting hurt if you want Jones to have the same target share that he did last year. But I'm not going to bet against Julio Jones. The guy is an absolute beast. And then Tyreek Hill, last year if you looked at the games where he actually played the full game, you take out week 1 where he got hurt after like 12 plays. You take out the game where he hurt his hamstring in the first quarter. He was still the 3rd best receiver in points per game, but he does also have a similar effect like we were talking about with Stephon Diggs, where he does have some games where he just kind of disappears. He has massive blow-up games where he's putting up 30 points a week, and then all of a sudden he puts up an 8 or 7-point game. And that's not something you see Julio Jones, Davante Adams, Michael Thomas do very often. So Tyreek Hill is definitely a little bit less of a safe play and more of a boom-bust player, but those boom weeks literally can win you your week. And anyone tied to Patrick Mahomes is a good idea. So these are all guys I'm looking at in the top of the second round. All right, and then we get to our tier 3. So this is a interesting tier because there's not a huge gap between the guys in tier 3 and tier 4, but I just like these players specifically just a little bit more than everyone else we're about to talk about. DJ Moore is my favorite wide receiver this year, bar none. I am doing my best to take him every single chance that I get. I'm overweight on him, so understand that, but love DJ Moore this year. Last year, and if you take out the game where he got concussed in the first drive, through that point, through 14 games, he was a wide receiver 8. He was playing with Kyle Allen, one of the least efficient and least accurate quarterbacks playing in the NFL last year. Gets to play with Teddy Bridgewater, who was the second most accurate quarterback last year. Yes, Teddy Bridgewater has never been known for he's never been known for being a like he's not Patrick Mahomes. Like, I'm not going to argue that, but comparing Teddy Bridgewater and Kyle Allen, Teddy Bridgewater is far superior. Add in the fact that you bring in Joe Brady, who was the architect of giving Joe Burrow the best season in terms of production for a college team in the entire history of college football. DJ Moore is a yak monster who is very targetable in the intermediate section of the field where Teddy Bridgewater is best in. You add Robbie Anderson to stretch the field. DJ Moore is going to absolutely eat this year. I'll rest my case because I've said it so many times. You can go check out my video on him. But I love DJ Moore this year. I would take him very high. DeAndre Hopkins, a little concerned with that injury. Might be an injury. Might be a contract situation. He said himself he's not holding out, but what does that mean? And then obviously anytime a wide receiver changes teams, that's always rough, right? Especially in a year where there's even less training time. But if there's one receiver that can actually do it and do it well, it's DeAndre Hopkins. He has played with a plethora of quarterbacks in his career, and with the exception of Brock Osweiler, has always averaged over 15 fantasy points per game, even with some of the worst quarterback play of all time. So I think DeAndre Hopkins is pretty much quarterback proof, and Kyler Murray is a good quarterback, guys. Like, don't think that this is a downgrade by any means. Kyler Murray could arguably be better than Deshaun Watson over the course of his career. Chris Godwin, dominant last year. There's some concern that he may have been nursing an injury, but there's no official report on that, so I'm operating as if that's not the case. I'm a little concerned that the overall pass volume in the offense will be down a little bit this year because I don't expect Tom Brady to throw 30 interceptions, and I think overall the Buccaneers offense is being a little overvalued just because of how many different targets there are now. But I think Chris Godwin is still arguably one of one of the most talented receivers in the NFL, and he'll still find a way to get his. Bruce Arians absolutely loves him, so I think he'll still be very involved. And then Allen Robinson playing, the opposite effect of the other receivers we talked about. Like, all these guys have good quarterbacks. Allen Robinson dealing with arguably the worst quarterback situation of all the top tier receivers. But last year, absolutely dominant in his target share and has been a really good receiver for his entire career. Never has been able to play with a good quarterback, but last year he was a wide receiver one playing with Mitchell Trubisky. Looks like Trubisky is going to get the start again, which I don't really know would be better between Trubisky and Foles. I'd probably say Foles, but if Trubisky ends up playing the whole year, Allen Robinson is still going to get peppered in targets. With David Montgomery already hurt, they're probably going to have to continue throwing it to him, and they didn't really do anything to add any pass catchers outside of the tight end, so absolutely love Allen Robinson this year. Okay, and then like I said, there's not a huge gap between these guys and the guys we just talked about. I just like those four specifically a little better than everyone else here. There's a lot of guys here, so I don't want to talk about all of them for the sake of time. Again, you can check out our player videos on our site if you want to know more about any of these guys. I'll highlight a few. Odell Beckham, I think, is going to absolutely smash this year. He was playing with a hernia all last year. This is the healthiest he's been in a while. And I trust that Kevin Stefanski is going to be able to give Cleveland a much better shot at competing this year. Robert Woods is always undervalued. The fact that he still goes in the fourth round makes no sense. He's finished in the top 12 2 years in a row, and he keeps getting drafted outside of it. They're going to run a lot more 12 personnel. Robert Woods was like the top 5, top 6 wide receiver over the back half of the season last year. Absolutely love A.J. Brown. We've already talked about him a little bit. I think he's going to smash this year. Adam Thielen could be undervalued here as well. With Stephon Diggs gone, Adam Thielen could be pushing for 120 receptions. That would be a really good year. Amari Cooper, I'm a little iffy on because he's already missing time in practice, and we saw last year how different of a player he was when he was nursing an injury, and he hasn't actually given us a full 16 games where he wasn't hurt. Mike Evans, I'm a little down on as well. I think last year he only had 5 games where you were happy starting him. So while he'll probably finish higher than I have him rated, you won't actually be excited starting him each week because he has so many dud games. And I'm not really sure how much that's going to change with Brady. I could be totally wrong on Mike Evans. If you feel strongly about him, go ahead. But Juju Smith-Schuster hopefully has a resurgence with Big Ben coming back. Calvin Ridley I like a lot, and Tyler Lockett. I think both of these guys are going to be target machines in their offense and should also be the primary touchdown scorers on their team. All right, jumping to Tier 5, though. I like these guys a lot, too. Again, there's not a huge gap between Tier 3 and Tier 5. Once we get past Tier 5 is when it starts to get a little murkier, but Terry McLaurin last year was one of the most productive rookies that we've seen in a while. Had a similar season to what we saw Julio Jones come out with his year one. Dwayne Haskins, by all reports, has been looking a lot better in camp, which I don't know what that means because last year he looked terrible. But Terry McLaurin is going too late to ignore. Absolutely love his upside. Keenan Allen, obviously his ceiling is a little bit limited this year, but he's getting a bit disrespected. Has finished, in the top 12 or near the top 12 for 3 straight seasons. And although Phillip Rivers is gone, there's not really anyone else in that offense outside of him and Hunter Henry and Austin Eckler. So even in a lower pass volume offense, should still be able to produce value where he's going in drafts. Cooper Kupp, I'm a little down on this year. He's already dealing with a left leg injury, i.e. he's dealing with his knee that has been giving him problems for a few years now, and the one that he tore an ACL in. So I'm concerned for Cooper Kupp. Because they're going to be running more 12 personnel, which means he can't run out of the slot, and his production drops massively when he plays on the outside. So that's one of the guys I'm honestly scared about fading because he was really good last year for the majority of the season. Even when Robert Woods was killing it, he was still scoring touchdowns every week. But if that touchdown rate comes down, which obviously I know he's the favorite target in the red zone, but Tyler Higbee had a ton of red zone targets last year and he kept getting tackled on like the 1 or 2 yard line. Cam Akers could take a bit more touchdowns in the passing game. Cooper Kupp sees his touchdowns come down by like 4 or 5. It's definitely a reasonable possibility coming off of double digits in 2019. I think you'd be pretty disappointed in Cooper Kupp. DJ Chark, I love a lot, especially with Leonard Fournette moving out of Jacksonville. Should have a massive workload there. Michael Gallup, arguably the better receiver between him and Cooper. They were like 0.3 points per game different over the course of the season. And nobody's talking about Michael Gallup. He had over 1,100 yards receiving in 14 games last year. Mike McCarthy's already come out and said that he views him as a wide receiver 1, which I don't think he meant that to say that he likes him better than Cooper, but I think Gallup is every bit as good as Cooper, and this coming into his third year, he could have a massive breakout season. And then Courtland Sutton, I think, gives us a little bit more ceiling than the other guys we're about to talk about. Not Dallas, sorry. And a typo there. That's obviously Denver. But like Courtland Sutton a lot, I do think his floor is a little bit lower because of the amount of pass catchers that they added to that team. But I think Courtland Sutton is the true alpha, at least this year, until Jerry Jeudy takes over. Okay, now we get to this tier. This is a tier I'm a little bit more uncertain about with all of these guys. So Devontae Parker is nursing an injury right now, and we don't really know the severity of it. But this has kind of been his MO for his entire career. Get hurt in the offseason and leave us wondering whether or not he's going to be able to perform for the remainder of the year. So with Preston Williams looking really good in camp, Mike Gesicki looking really good, if Devontae Parker isn't healthy heading into the season, that could be a bit of a problem. We've already talked about Stephon Diggs. He's going to get you plenty of 40-point and then plenty of 3-point games. I hate that headache, so I don't want to deal with it. DK Metcalf, with adding Josh Gordon, I think that limits his ceiling a little bit, but I'm just a big fan of Tyler Lockett this year. I think DK Metcalf is going to take another year or two to fully ascend into the number one target in this offense, just because he doesn't have that same rapport with Russell Wilson. All reports say he's been looking really good in camp, so I could be wrong on Metcalf, but I just like Lockett a bit more. AJ Green has massive upside, but already dealing with an injury, has been limited ever since injuring his hamstring about 2 weeks ago. I can't take a 32-year-old receiver that is already dealing with a nagging injury. I think he's the best receiving option on this team, and clearly the Bengals think that too, giving him, the franchise tag, paying him I think it was like $12 million. But he's already hurt. I just don't want to deal with that headache. Marquise Brown, very interesting guy in Baltimore. If he takes a step forward, could massively outproduce his ADP. Fantasy Twitter absolutely loves Marquise Brown. I'm not quite as high on him because I think Mark Andrews is still the clear number one target there. Also reports of Miles Boykin and Devin Duvernay looking really good. So I think people expecting Marquise Brown to be like a 100 reception guy is a little bit misguided, but he could definitely do a lot better than he did last year. I see him ending up basically the same player as Stephon Diggs, where you're only happy starting him like 6-8 weeks of the year. Julian Edelman, completely being ignored right now, but he's going to be the number one target there with Cam Newton. I don't know that Cam Newton will be able to support him into a top 12 role, but he should still be able to be a wide receiver too, as long as he stays healthy. He was still productive, even though he was dealing with like massive injuries last year. So obviously you're hoping that he can hold it together, but I think he's going at a massive value right now. And then T.Y. Hilton, same thing. Every year that T.Y. Hilton is healthy, he gets underdrafted and he outperforms. With Phillip Rivers has, better quarterback play than he did last year, but he was still a wide receiver one when healthy last year, playing with Jacoby Brissett. Biggest issue with him is health, and obviously that's been a recurring theme with him, so that's something to note. All right, tier number 7. This is a tier I like to grab a few of these guys. So my overall strategy is to take either 3 or 4 running backs before we get to this tier of receivers, and have 2 or 3 receivers from tiers 1 through 5. Tier 6, I'm kind of avoiding altogether. Once we get to tier 7, there's a lot of guys here that are actually going a bit later in drafts that you can steal. Guys like Deshaun Jackson, Sterling Shepard, absolutely love them this year. Deshaun Jackson, now with Jalen Reagor hurt, he could end up being a wide receiver 1 for the first half of the season. And even if he gets hurt and doesn't finish the rest of the year, you still had a really good player to help get you off to a good start. And then you can find someone else on waiver wire. Maybe Jalen Reagor's on waiver because he didn't play for the first month of the season. Jamison Crowder is going to get like 150 targets. Don't know what he's going to do with them, but in a PPR league, that's going to give you a really high floor every week. Deontay Johnson is interesting. Brandon Cooks could outperform Will Fuller. Will Fuller, I don't think I'm going to get him based on where I'm ranking him, but he has a pretty high ceiling as well. Tyler Boyd could end up being the Justin Jefferson with Joe Burrow, meaning he could see over 100 targets. Marvin Jones is always undervalued. He almost scores as much as Kenny Golladay every single year, but he still has a massive ADP difference. So I'd rather draft Jones than Golladay. And then Jarvis Landry, same thing. I know people make the argument. I think there is a pretty big difference between Beckham and Landry in terms of talent. Didn't see it play out last year because, one, Beckham was coming into his season pretty late. and didn't have a full offseason to be able to work with Baker because he was dealing with an injury and he was hurt all last year. And then two, Jarvis is also dealing with his own recovery of a hip surgery he had. I believe it was a hip surgery. So that could still limit him to start the year. It doesn't look like he's going to miss any time, but I don't expect him to be 100% to start the season. So that's why I like Beckham so much more this year. All right, and then I believe this is the last receiver tier I want to talk about. Same thing, grab two guys in this tier. Christian Kirk, going to have decent upside. If DeAndre Hopkins ends up starting the season a little slow, I mean, Christian Kirk already has the rapport with Kyler Murray, and he was dealing with his own injuries last year, but not having to play with the number one corner, I think is going to really help him. Anthony Miller started to take a step forward last year, so we'll see if he can continue that trend. CeeDee Lamb will probably be a better receiver over the second half of the season, but I could see him stepping into a pretty dominant role there, taking over the Randall Cobb role, which had flex appeal last year, but he's much better than Randall Cobb. Darius Slayton, a guy I really like a lot. I think he'll start out a little bit slow, especially with the defenses that the Giants play for the first couple weeks, but he's someone that I'll probably be targeting on waivers, assuming he's there after a couple weeks. And last year he really showed to be one of Daniel Jones' favorite targets. Deebo Samuel is interesting. I probably have him ranked too low, but I'm nervous with the Jones fracture that has a very high recurrence of injury. And while his ADP has been suppressed, because he was like a fifth round guy for me until he suffered that injury, I'm just concerned until we actually see him playing and he has, his back to his normal production. I'm concerned that he's not going to be able to play this year at full strength. And again, that re-injury occurrence when you come back too soon is like 50%. So Deebo is someone I would rather let someone else take a chance on. If I'm wrong, I'll swallow it. Paris Campbell, guy that's going really late, but has been killing it in camp, could arguably end up being the most valuable receiver in Indianapolis. Phillip Rivers loves to throw the slot. Paris Campbell is playing in the slot. Love him this year. Bryan Edwards has been turning a bunch of heads in the Raiders camp, and he's been playing at X. He could end up being the most valuable receiver for the Raiders. Then Laviska Shenault is someone that you grab with the very last pick of every single draft because, for one, he's dominating in camp. For another, he's going to take up a bigger role in the run game because with Fournette gone, their running backs are pretty gross. And Laviska Shenault can play like that Deebo Samuel role. He's going to get a lot of carries. And I think a lot of people are underrating what Laviska Shenault can do for this team. Even if he doesn't see, a massive target share, he'll probably still be the clear number 2 outside of DJ Chark. But if he's getting 4 carries a game, he's able to, produce 30, 40 rushing yards on the ground, potentially break one every couple weeks. Like that's going to give you a pretty high baseline for a receiver. I think is worth a shot. If there's any rookies that I'm targeting this year, it's Edwards and Shenault because of how cheap they are and their potential upside. Jerry Jeudy's interesting as well. All reports are that he's been doing pretty good in camp as well. But that being said, I think you can get Edwards and Shenault for such a cheap price. It's worth going after it. Sorry for my dogs. They're spazzes. But okay. All right, let's look at the tight ends. I know we're going through a lot of this, guys. Again, check out the website. If you don't have time to watch this whole video, click the link in the description. Go to fantasyaddictionnetwork.com. You can get all these. I have printable versions of this if you're going into your drafts, and we've been updating these as news has come out. But I think this is the cherry on top. I think we're finally done, unless we get any strains, cuts, or injuries over the course of the next week. All right, tier 1. I love both of these guys equally. Travis Kelce, George Kittle. I think George Kittle is going to start off the year hotter than Kelce, but they could end up finishing with Kelce on top. Kittle is obviously coming into a situation where everyone in San Francisco has been hurt at the wide receiver position. I think that just means that George Kittle is going to get like 10 targets a week for the first 4 weeks. And obviously Kelce has led at the tight end position for the last 3 or 4 years, so there's not really much reason to discredit him. Both of these guys just got a contract extension, so they're locked up for a while. Only tight ends I'm really considering taking early would be Kelce or Kittle. Next, we have Mark Andrews and Zach Ertz. I think Mark Andrews is going to have a pretty good year. I'm a little concerned considering he is a type 1 diabetic. If he ends up catching COVID, that could keep him out a bit longer than the other guys on his team, and he is one of the guys that could potentially end up opting out in the middle of the season because he's still in a high-risk category. I don't know that that'll happen. I think he's a competitor, And if he had wanted to do that, he would have opted out already because of that. So I'm not sure what will end up happening with him. I don't want to speculate on that because I don't know what's going to happen. Mark Andrews is an incredibly talented guy and will likely be the most valuable passing option in Baltimore again. So he's probably worth a 4th, 5th round pick. I'm just not targeting tight ends there. Same thing with Zach Ertz. And Zach Ertz, while we'll probably start the season really well, I'm a little concerned with the news report that we got last week where contract negotiations with Ertz just got upended out of nowhere. That's a little concerning to me. I don't think we'll see a holdout situation with Ertz, but it's a potential. And if that's the case, make sure you have your thumb on the waiver wire for Dallas Goedert. Okay, tier 3, also guys, I'm probably not targeting unless they fall to me in like the 9th or 10th round. Darren Waller, they added a ton of pass catchers in Las Vegas. And last year really saw the majority of his fantasy points come from games where Tyrell Williams was hurt, where Hunter Renfrow was hurt, where Foster Moreau was hurt. Now they add Jason Witten, they add Henry Ruggs, they add Bryan Edwards. Hunter Renfrow is still there. They add receiving weapons out of the backfield. I don't think Darren Waller is going to get nearly the same target share that we saw last year, which is what made him so valuable. So while I think he's talented and he'll probably end up being a decent performer each week, I don't think he gives you near the same ceiling, and you're having to draft him at a ceiling. So not taking him. Tyler Higbee, all reports are that he's killing it in camp. And this is a offense that's being centered around getting him and Robert Woods the ball. So I love Tyler Higbee this year. And his ADP has dropped into like the 8th, 9th round. If there's no other receiver options going around there, or you waited on quarterback, I'm comfortable taking Tyler Higbee in the 8th or 9th. If he falls to the 10th, it's pretty much an auto pick for me. But we'll see what ends up happening. Obviously, Gerald Everett is still there, so that can end up spoiling things a bit. And any of these guys you take, you're going to want to take a second guy. The only time you're going to want to walk out with only one tight end this year is if you grab Kittle or Kelsey. If you draft, I guess Andrews or Ertz would fall into that category too, but anyone else, you're going to want to draft an upside guy late in the draft just in case he turns into the next Mark Andrews or Darren Waller type, because there's always those kind of guys that massively outproduce their ADP. All right, next we get to tier 4. Speaking of guys that can massively outproduce their ADP, and back to your question, King Kearns, Mike Gesicki, TJ Hawkinson, Johnny Smith, Blake Jarwin. I love getting 2 of these guys. Mike Gesicki, I think, has the best chance at performing this year. He was doing really well over the back half of last year with Devontae Parker already hurt, and coming into an offense where we saw Albert Wilson and Allen Hurns both opt out. There's going to be a massive concentration of targets thrown towards Mike Gesicki. He's one of the most athletically gifted tight ends in the league, and could very well jump into that elite tier of tight ends outside of Kelsey and Kittle, but I could see him finishing the year in the top 5. TJ Hawkinson, same thing, one of the most athletically gifted tight ends in the league. They let Logan Thomas go, who is looking pretty good in Washington right now, and all reports are that he's been dominating in camp, trained with George Kittle in the offseason. TJ Hawkinson is ready to take a big step forward. We'll see if it happens this year. If it doesn't happen this year, it's definitely going to happen at some point, but I like the shot with TJ Hawkinson. Same thing with Johnny Smith. Johnny Smith needs to get the ball more. He is one of their best playmakers. He even is really good when they give him carries out of the backfield, so I hope they give him like a carry or 2 a week. My only concern for Tennessee is that is a lower pass volume team, so I'm not sure that Johnny Smith is going to give you the floor that you want. I think Gesicki and Hawkinson have the potential to be like 5 reception a week guys at some point in the season, whereas Johnny Smith is probably not going to reach that, but I think he gives you a really high upside every week, and we'll see if the offense has to shift their philosophy at all. And then Blake Jarwin, biggest concern for him is he's basically the 5th option on the pecking order with Cooper and Gallup and CeeDee Lamb and Ezekiel Elliott. He's probably the 5th best option there in Dallas, but all reports are that he's absolutely killing it right now. And Dak Prescott has historically targeted this tight end a lot with Jason Witten there. So I think Blake Jarwin definitely has an upside chance at outperforming his ADP as well. I just like taking 2 of these guys, because if I can grab them 11th, 12th, 13th round, take 2, one of them is going to blow up, and you're going to end up not having to play the waiver game at tight end, which I hate having to play because it's an ugly game. Playing the streaming game with quarterback is easy because there's always a quarterback starter on waivers. The tight end, it's a little bit grosser. So if you can get 2 of these guys, that is my ideal strategy. So for you, King Kearns, back to your question, if you can get both Hawkinson and Jonnu Smith, do it. and do it confidently. If you only hit one of these guys, then your next stopgap for you can grab some people is this tier, which honestly, these tiers are pretty close to each other in my mind. But Chris Herndon, my only reason why I have him lower than the other guys is because he's already nursing an injury, which has been his career. So I'm hoping that he'll be able to actually put together a full season, but it's not looking likely. If he did, though, he's going to end up being one of the best draft day values because he is pretty much the favorite target there outside of Jamison Crowder, and Jamison Crowder isn't very good. Chris Herndon is very athletic. He has decent rapport with Sam Darnold, and he had a pretty decent stretch in 2018 where he was dominating in fantasy. So he just needs to stay healthy, and Chris Herndon will be an incredible value. Dallas Goedert, if Ertz ends up holding out or something weird like that, he'll be an incredible steal where he's going. Noah Fant, I also like his potential breakout. I'm basically taking Gronk and Jared Cook off of my draft board. Austin Hooper is an interesting guy as well. He's been doing good in camp, and his ADP has dropped enough that I'm willing to take him. But again, lower pass volume offense with concentration already headed towards Beckham, Landry, and Kareem Hunt. So probably avoiding Hooper. All right, guys. Whew. That was a bit of a mouthful going through all these tiers. Again, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I'm really excited to continue to put out content for you guys over the course of the season. We'll be getting our rankings up, our trade values, everything up on our website next week. So keep an eye out for that. But if you have your drafts this week, I guess my biggest piece of advice to you is go after the guys you have conviction on. Don't feel bad taking a guy that you feel strongly about. Don't be slaves to ADP. If you're looking at your list and it says, like, great example, if you're in the third round and you feel really strongly about DJ Moore, but ADP is saying you should be taking Kenny Golladay. Don't feel like you have to follow the ADP. Go with the guys you have conviction about. Everyone is coming into your draft with a different perception of how this is going to be. And guess what? Some of us are right and some of us are wrong. No one's going to be able to get 100% of their predictions correct. But at the end of the day, you want to draft guys you're going to be happier if they end up hitting. Because if you take Golladay and DJ Moore turns into this year's Chris Godwin, you're going to be mad at yourself for the rest of the year. Whereas if you take DJ Moore and he gets hurt, at least you took a shot on the guy that you liked. So go after the guys you like. Be willing to reach around if you need to. Try to play ADP as best you can because that's how you get values. But if you like a guy that's going in the 7th and you're worried he's not going to be there, you can take him in the 6th. That's fine, especially once you get to the 6th round and beyond. Start ignoring ADP, especially once you get to round 9, 10. Just take the guys you want because you don't want to backfill your roster with guys that you're never going to want to start. And good luck. Have fun. Enjoy this time. I don't know if people are actually getting together to do drafts. I'm sure some people are. So if you have a draft party, have fun. If it's on Zoom, still try to have a good time. And good luck to you guys. Hit me up with any questions. My goal throughout this off season is to reply to every single comment that is left in my YouTube videos. Anything that reaches out to me on Twitter, I will respond to your message. We'll probably get back on Instagram and give some information there too. We'll throw that up when we restart that. But any questions you guys have at any point in the year, if you're just looking for confirmation bias or just curious what I would do, hit me up. I'd be more than happy to help you out. Check out the website. It's free this year. And we'll be giving you guys, the best analysis that we possibly can, and know that I'm using this same information for my own drafts. So I'm doing it with conviction because I want to win. I want you guys to win, and that's it. So thank you for watching. I appreciate you joining me in this journey, and good luck to you in 2020. Take care.